presentation deals with psychology. Psychology, as it applies to the individual participating in the programs, is a key issue for both the pro and con teams. Mr. Manix White will talk about the issue of identity from an individual perspective. Mr. White.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm excited to share with you all the first psychology session, which will build off of Mr. Ashley's presentation in looking at identity from an individual perspective. And the hallmark of this presentation is superordinate identity. And superordinate is a big word, but I'll try to break it down for you. So think of super as in above and ordinate as in order. So it's the order above. And how that relates to identity is a relative term that is used to refer to an identity that is broader than another. So for example, my identity personally as a global citizen is superordinate when compared to my identity as a white male. Salience is another important concept that will recur throughout this presentation. And salience is what's at the top of your mind. So it's what you're thinking about. It's what's most important and what's most relevant in your mind. And identity in experiments can be made salient by reading stories you identify with. But a more relatable example of salience is, as Mr. Bremner alluded to earlier, my closet is filled with maroon and gold. And I went on spring break in Colorado, and I brought a lot of Minnesota shirts with me. And even halfway across the country, wearing a block M across my chest, people would say, "Go Gophers" to me, which indicates that their identity as a Minnesota student or alumnus is salient because that's what they're thinking about when they see the logo. So superordinate identity has a breadth of evidence that shows that it can reduce polarization in a number of ways. When superordinate identity is at the top of your mind or is salient, it can lead to prejudice being reduced. A salient superordinate identity, so a broad identity that's at the top of your mind, can lead to forgiveness for others, an emphasis on social justice, and an emphasis on social responsibility for things like reducing climate change, and support for diplomacy. More specifically, studies have looked at the salience or importance of a global identity versus that of an American identity. And they find that those who are thinking about global citizenship instead of American citizenship, they prioritize peace. And also a global citizen identity is more strongly associated with a sense of responsibility to solve societal issues, forgiveness for political attacks, and even concern for human rights. There are, however, some issues with making superordinate identity salient in your mind. When you are thinking about a larger or broader identity as a majority race group member, you are less likely to identify racial biases, which makes sense, right? Because you're thinking about everybody as a whole, and so it's less likely that you'll be able to see differences and the results of differences between people. And you're especially unlikely to notice subtle discrimination against minorities. There is a possible solution to this problem, and that is the salience of a dual identity. So this means that you're thinking not only about your identity as a citizen of a country or of the nation, or of the world, but also as with your identity as a member of a more specific social group. So, for example, my dual identity could be thinking of myself as a white American. This would allow me to both think about racial injustices that might afflict minority populations while also reducing my prejudice against those populations. And it is also associated with pro-social action. So those who are thinking about their identity both as a citizen and also as a member of a social group are more likely to take action against racial injustices. So to sum up, superordinate identity can improve many metrics associated with polarization. A sense of global identity has even stronger effects than an American identity. Superordinate identity can cloud a person's ability to notice injustices, but a dual identity may allow an individual to become less prejudiced while priming them to notice injustices at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll have questions from the pro and con legal teams, as well as we will address questions from the jury. Mr. Bremner, you may ask questions at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. So Manix, you discussed how having a broad superordinate identity has positive effects on certain metrics that impact polarization. Can you describe how a broader superordinate identity is developed?
Yeah, so one example of, and this is possibly the strongest example of how a broad superordinate identity can be developed is through interactions with diverse social groups. And this is something that'll come up later as well. But interacting with a heterogeneous group can allow you to think about your similarities and therefore a broader identity.
Thank you. So would you say that, for example, in American identity, trying to increase the salience of an American identity, which includes a variety of people, without that same variety might not have the same effect?
I would agree to that, yes.
All right, thank you. I have no more questions.
Mr. Satpathy.
Thank you, Your Honor. Manix, I just had a question. In terms of you mentioned identities could be dual in terms of a global identity and an American identity. What do you think people would hold on to more strongly in terms of their identity? Would it be the global one or the American identity?
I think that would depend on their environment. So if in the context of service, if they are participating in a more globalized program, I would hypothesize that they would be more inclined to have a stronger global identity. And if they were solely working towards the betterment of the United States as a more insular community, I would hypothesize that they would have a stronger sense of American identity.
So do you believe that these identities, to what extent does external factors, like as you mentioned, programs they take part in, influence the identity of the person?
There are a number of factors that influence someone's development or recategorization of their identity, which can come both from within, for example, your self-esteem or your motivation, but also from your environment. And I think that is extremely important, yes.
And my last question would be, do you think that in response to in terms of something which is forced onto the person, or if the person wants to change their identity by their own will, what would they be more conducive towards or more willing to change?
Well, considering that motivation is one of the factors that can lead to the development of a stronger identity. I would say that free will is something that is relatively important in that sense.
Okay, thank you, Manix. No further questions, Your Honor.
I have questions from the jury that is important for all three individuals. Mr. Bremner, if you'd come back on screen. I'll start by posing the portion of the question that applies to psychology. Mr. White, the question is it harder to change or move deeply entrenched or long-held identities, particularly racial issues, that might have emerged starting in childhood than other types of issues? In other words, does your research show anything about deeply held issues or how hard it is to change them?
Yes, identities that you have held for longer or are stronger or are a bigger part of your life are more difficult to change. For example, it would be very difficult for me to change my sense of American citizenship or American or my pride in being an American, but it would be relatively easy for me to change my identity as a student or something like that that is relatively, as a college student or something like that that's relatively new to me.
Thank you. The portion of the question now addressed to the program representatives. Mr. Bremner, how would your proposal address the issue of deeply entrenched identities or extreme views?
Well, one way our program is aimed to try and combat those deeply entrenched ideas is we're aiming most strongly at young people. So right out of high school, because those deeply entrenched ideas are likely still like in formation when one is in their teenage years, just out of high school. Rather like later in adulthood, it might be much harder to change them. And in terms of how we're going to do it, our goal is just through interaction with a diverse group, in a sense that many people who have those entrenched ideas just simply have not had, and probably won't have without a program such as this one. If they come from a limited community, a limited area, and demographically, racially, just having an opportunity while they're still developing to interact and have an experience with other people is our plan to try and combat those ideas.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sympathy, how would your proposal voluntary program address these deeply entrenched issues?
I think our program, especially when it's focused, is we don't prioritize any particular age group for who is to benefit or who is to take the most from the program. We are treating Americans from all age groups and coming from all types of communities with the equal priority, because we believe that even though you might be young and your ideals or your perspectives are being molded at that stage, we have a group of people who are who are in their mid 50s or in their mid 60s who already hold very entrenched views which may be regressive in nature. So we believe that they play a very important role in American politics and American society, because at the end of the day, they also vote, they also elect leaders, and they also take part in community. So we believe that since we have such a diverse group of age groups and people from different ethnicities, it is important that since we want to bring these groups together, we create that safe space and for them to interact with one another, have conversations which are not general in nature, but more personalized. And more than that, actually allow them to collaborate with one another, be it in community service, even when you're in your own community, or even working together as part of a team for skills development. And that is how we would want to combat this.
Thank you very much. And now statements from the pro and con legal teams. Mr. Bremner, your statement.
Thank you. So, identity is powerful. As we've discussed, it comes in a variety of forms. religious identity, racial identity, national identity. People can do both wonderful and horrible things motivated by a strong sense of identity. As I stated in my opening statement, now we have a little bit more vocabulary to work with. We seek to build the salience of an American identity in the participants of our mandatory service program. And we want to make sure that we build the right American identity, an inclusive one. Like Manix said, a superordinate identity is one that goes beyond our other identities. We want to ensure that the identity as a member of our program and as an American goes beyond participants' racial identities by ensuring interaction between races. We want to ensure that it goes beyond participants' gender identities by ensuring interaction between genders and so on. We want to ensure that we're not unintentionally saying, you're in America, you're an American, this is America, this is what America looks like, to participants surrounded by, say, just white people. When we remind participants of their American identity, we want to remind them of what that identity truly means. It is an identity for everyone, including everyone. And as Manix mentioned, we don't want to replace people's core identity, their racial identity, their gender identity. We simply want to add to it. With a mandatory service program, we are better equipped to carry out this goal because of how we are able to engage Americans of all identities and demographics. With this ability and this level of engagement, we can show the whole population that this is an America for all and help build a strong, inclusive national identity.
Thank you. Mr. Sympathy, your statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think our voluntary program focuses on the fact that, as Manix mentioned, the dual identity is something which could help in reducing that polarization. We understand that, and we agree with the pro side that identity is something very important to us. As an individual myself, I also have my identities governed by a multitude of factors, be it my country of origin, be it the place I'm studying, or the people I'm interacting with. But what we differ in is that if I was to be told to take part in the program, which would force me to change my identity or would make me want, for a requirement, would probably want me to hold on to my identity a lot more strongly, and especially if I have regressive points in my identity. We believe in our voluntary program that we are giving the opportunity for people from different age groups, from different communities, to come together and interact with people interact with a community which is heterogeneous in nature. And since we are providing the people with the choice to take part whenever they would like to do so, coupled with the right incentives, they would be more likely to evolve their identity willingly and of their own will. And this will probably lead to a lot more positive impacts on their community, as probably one person doing it in the community would encourage people to do it in their community to take part in it as well. And this will lead to a positive domino effect, which we want to encourage. And hence we believe, and this is how we would combat the issue of identity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. White, are you still there? We have one more question for you.
Yes, I'm still here.
The question is from the jury. Does your research indicate anything about, is it easier to change beliefs at a younger age or an older age? In other words, is there an age correlation to issues of changing or reforming or modifying a person's deeply held beliefs? In other words, how do we address the age issue here as to extreme beliefs? Short answer, please.
Sure. I can't speak exactly to the formation of a new identity at a different age, but I can say that it has been shown that prejudice can be reduced more effectively at a younger age.
Thank you. That'll conclude this session. We'll take a moment here.